mindful of his time. So yeah, why don't we do that? We'll kind of get started slowly and hope that JL joins soon. So, all right. Good morning, everyone. This is the November 7th, 2024 meeting of the Vermont Climate Council's Agriculture and Ecosystem Subcommittee. We're meeting from 10 to noon this morning, and our agenda is primarily focused on discussing the three task groups, initial priorities, and any updates or revisions they made to the strategies, pathways, and actions. We're going to take each group one by one and then provide an opportunity for public comment afterwards. Then we'll wrap with a discussion about our next steps and then adjourn by noon. We were going to go in numeric order of task groups, 1, 2, and 3, but I think we've heard from some members of task group 3 that some of their members need to leave a little early. So hoping that we can kind of maybe bump that up to the first slot if folks are okay with that. And task group 3 is the task group that provided their homework on time and early. So they get preferential treatment regardless. So thank you, folks, for that. Any questions or comments about that agenda? All right. Evan, you've been doing a ton of work in the background and in the foreground, kind of supporting the task groups and Jael and I in pulling this all together. Any comments or direction from you before we kind of jump in?
No, I mean, I'm not the one that's doing all the work. It's all the task groups. So thank you all thank you guys for doing that. I have some slides just kind of thrown together from some information from a couple of task groups. Ryan's got one that he'll share on his end, but the goal here is, I've got that one task group with their kind of priority action groups. So I got a few slides for that task group with Andrew, Judy, and Earl. And then I got some information from that second task group with Jake and Steven. So I've got a couple slides there to share as well. So when we get there, you can kind of talk about them. So, if there's any questions, sorry if I didn't include anything, or sorry if I didn't include enough or included too much, but hopefully it gives us kind of a starting point for discussion today.
Thank you, Evan. And I'm going to provide a little bit more kind of framing context and then kind of reintroduce folks to David, and then we'll get rolling. So, today is November 7th. We're going to hopefully get through all three task groups today. And this is going to be like a high level conversation, and I don't think we will have final priorities or recommendations out of the three task groups today by any means. I think there's a lot of information here, but I think our hope is that we'll at least get some high level themes that seem to be emerging from the three task groups that there is general support by the full subcommittee around. Those are themes that we ideally can share in some of the upcoming information meetings that have been scheduled. There'll be opportunities before our next meeting on the 14th for folks to dig a little bit deeper into what the task groups have shared today and reflect on our conversation. And I think the hope is that when we come back on the 14th, we can go through any changes or revisions or kind of tweaks to what came out of today's conversation. And then, excuse me, the 21st is when we come back again, not the 14th. And when we come back on the 21st, we can kind of dig into any issues that subcommittee members have identified as needing more work or discussion. And ideally, at that meeting, come up with at least an initial set of final priorities, and then kind of try to wrap that work up completely at our December 5th meeting so that we've got something that we can move on to the council. So I think that's the general arc today. First touch, high level issue spotting, identify areas that might need a little bit more work or consideration when we get together again on the 21st. kind of dig into those hopefully few remaining outstanding issues or questions and work to move forward a final set of priorities. And then on December 5th, wrap it all up. So I don't know if folks have any questions or comments about that before we get rolling. And I also want to give David a chance to kind of introduce himself and kind of share his vision of all this as well, being the lead facilitator for the council. But before we do that, any questions or comments on all the words that just came out of my mouth? Good. All right. Dave, would you mind just
Sure.
kind of reintroducing yourself to the group and sharing any thoughts that you have before we get rolling?
Sure, Billy. Yeah, absolutely. For folks that don't know me, I'm David Plum, and my role is here to help facilitate the work of the Vermont Climate Council, both the council and helping with subcommittees. Many of you I've worked with either last time around or this time around as well. I think one of the reasons I'm here today is just help facilitate today's meeting. There's a lot to get through, and it allows Billy and Jael to be participants, not facilitators. So I'm just helpful today. I'll say one more thing, which is sort of what the end goal here for subcommittees is in terms of what the council is expecting. What the council is expecting in its December 16th meeting is that subcommittees come with two things. One, the full list of pathways, strategies, and actions that reflects the revisions you've made of them, like that full list, and that'll probably be expressed in that Excel sheet that I think you've been working on as templates. So whatever revisions from last time around, whatever additions, subtractions, just that new consolidated list. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is what Billy's been talking about, which is among all these important things, are there a handful that you'd want to make sure the council includes in a shorter list that they're going to compile this time around of like things you really want to pay attention to, legislature, administration, et cetera. So those are the two things that the council is looking for from you, the full list of important things, and then just a handful of things that we want to lift up to the top. And the council is very clear this time around, unlike I would say last time around when they did the initial climate action plan, that it wants to include a shorter list and doesn't know how many that's going to be 20, 30, who knows what it is, but a shorter list of things to really capture people's attention, in addition to saying all of the things below are also important. Okay, so that's what the council is looking for. And you've got this meeting, the next one, and then your final one in December to wrap it up. So that's uh, that's the vision, at least from the council. Judy?
David, we worked very hard to combine and make fewer, but then we also added. So my question is, what happens to the ones that we prioritized and the ones that are still on the list? What happens to those? Are they forgotten?
No, no. So again, the council is looking for the full list, right? The full list, which then becomes the guts. I mean, they're going to deliberate and do their thing, right? They'll talk about it, but essentially they're taking that full list and making it the climate action plan when it combines with the other subcommittees. And then they're taking the things that you're lifting up and saying, okay, are these the right things to include in our top 20 or our top 30, whatever it's going to be? Nothing gets lost in the sense of the full list is there. The only things that could get lost is if the council decides that one of the strategies or actions doesn't really make sense to them. And they may say, you know what, we don't want to move forward with that. And that's the council's prerogative. That's why they're selected by the legislature. Uh, but in terms of the deliverable from you all, it's, they'll take what you, both the full list and that sort of signal of the high priority things. I think, does that answer your question, Judy?
Sort of, because I think things were lost last year. That's why
Last time around?
we added some things back on.
Yeah, I would say there may be a distinction between something that's lost and something that the council didn't agree with. So though I don't know exactly the things you're referencing now, if they fall in one of those two buckets, but my goal certainly is that nothing gets lost, right? Everything gets delivered, right? The council is fully aware of everything. And if they decide to do certain things, add additional things, take away things, that's kind of their prerogative.
That's too bad.
Yeah, it is the way the legislature set it up is the council is the decision-making body of this. Um, and that's just the design that the council has.
Yeah, it's just I just say it's too bad because they gave us all this lip service last year of consensus on everything, and then that went out the window real fast when they understood how consensus worked.
Okay. Well, my hope here is uh, that you all do the good deliberation you need to do around the things you want to put forward, and then the council can see that deliberation and make the decisions it's going to make, and it's all very clear. Yeah. Okay, so that's what I wanted to say in terms of what the council's asking of folks. Um, and
Thanks,
with
David.
that,
Go
why
ahead.
don't we jump into the task group 3? Um, and let's see the kinds of things you want to make sure the rest of the subcommittee is aware of, the kinds of things you want to start lifting up perhaps as priorities in addition to the full range of things that you are working on. Evan, you had mentioned you had some presentation stuff there. Andrew, it's Andrew, Judy, and Earl, right? Um, do you all
Yeah.
want to take it away and give Evan instruction when to put something on screen?
Yeah. So I mean, it'll be a surprise a little bit to, I guess, what they're seeing. But I can show you real quick. I'll share my screen. Can everyone see that?
You need, yes.
Okay. So for that task group, I just want to share that, I have all of your kind of action groups listed. Um, and I've broken down the first one just to give an example of like what your process is. So if you guys want to take it away from here, I've just got a few slides there for you to kind of talk through. And, maybe there's any items that you want to pull out to kind of lift up or discuss with the rest of the group.
That's great. Okay. And
I
might
mean,
suggest before we dive into the specific action groups that are sort of what it sounds like are some emerging priorities, maybe you can just do a quick introduction of sort of where you are overall in your process, the full list, and then this kind of prioritization, and then we can take a look at the detail here.
yeah, hi, this is Andrew. And we didn't talk about this, but I can start.
Okay.
And I, first of all, want to acknowledge and appreciate the opportunity to work with Judy and Earl. We worked really hard on this over many meetings. I think we started with 80 or 90 actions that we were looking at. And I also want to acknowledge that Marley provided some really valuable input towards the end. So thanks to all of them for that. So as you can see in front of you, what we ended up doing is identifying sort of Uber actions or action groups that captured a number of actions that really fit together and are sort of sub actions of the bigger action group. And this first one is an example of that. This is really the action group that's about technical assistance and providing support and resources related to climate change adaptation to a variety of landowners and land managers. And I'll mention that the term that we came up with to most accurately describe that group is land and water caretakers, as being a way to think about that. And this included the educational materials that are needed, and ensuring that those materials were specific to Vermont conditions and ecotypes, and really importantly that any Western science was fully integrating and braiding in traditional ecological knowledge and indigenous knowledge and representing a diversity of perspectives. We and related to that, that we really needed additional funding for this technical assistant and the development of these educational materials. That we needed to make some revisions to the state guide for restoring resilient forests to making it more usable, accessible, and representing a diversity perspective. So you can see that's the three actions that were grouped together into this first action group around technical assistance. And I can go through the rest, or I could ask if Judy or Earl or Marley want to add anything to this.
Go through the rest, Andrew. You were our official note taker, and that worked out well.
Great. The next action group, as you can see, I think Evan gave you the example of with the bullets that under the first one, but we also would have bullets under these two. But this kind of just shows you at the action group level. The second action group was really about promoting funding for. Isn't quite. I'm not seeing quite what I thought it was going to look like.
Okay.
But,
do you have other notes, Andrew, that better explain it?
Well, I had the action group 2 was basically promote funding for nature-based solutions and traditional ecological knowledge, and incorporate nature-based solutions and traditional ecological knowledge into state planning efforts.
Apologies.
So that
if I was looking at your other worksheet as well, and that strategy was revised there, so I apologize for transferring that over.
That's fine. Yeah. So I should have said up front, we actually spent a lot of time revising strategies and actions. So I would say for the vast majority of strategies and actions, we suggested some revisions. And I think that is probably the original action statement. And what I just read out, promote funding for nature-based solutions and traditional ecological knowledge and indigenous knowledge efforts, incorporate NBS and TEK into state planning efforts, was our overall action group description. And under that, we talked about the importance of developing financial mechanisms to de-risk capital investment and make sure they were informed by TEK and IK, incentivizing NBS and TEK in state regulatory processes and funding programs, elevating the role of TEK and IK, and making sure to braid TEK and IK and other approaches into state-led climate assessments, planning efforts, and prioritization, and including tribal members and traditional indigenous families utilizing ecological knowledge and indigenous knowledge in state, regional, and municipal planning and management. So that was our second action group. And again, those actions could potentially be our sort of key and fit together. They could potentially be put together into an Uber action if that made sense.
Yeah.
The third action group is as on the screen there: manage natural and working lands and waters for biodiversity, forest health, water quality, and climate resilience. Really important. We in a lot of our discussions is that through working on these different aspects, we can achieve these different goals of biodiversity, forest health, water quality, and climate resilience through some of the same actions related to restoring and maintaining our natural systems. We had several, this one actually has several actions in it, having to do with establishing primary land management objectives for forest health, water quality, and biodiversity in state lands and waters, informed by traditional ecological knowledge, enhancing resilience funds to support the financial capacity for land and water caretakers to allow them to increase ecosystem resilience and enhance biological diversity and improve water quality. Actually, those are the two that are in that one. Then the fourth action group is focused somewhat on flood resilience and utilizing nature-based solutions to increase flood resilience of the natural and built environments and reduce future development in floodplains and floodways, and educate state and municipal planners, promoting healthy connected river corridors, floodplains, and wetlands. So as written there. And in that, there was several actions that tied into that, including incentivizing water storage in headwaters and natural areas, prioritizing floodplain reconnection and nature-based solutions, supporting and funding research to strategically invest in floodplain and river corridor reforestation efforts, expanding support and education for riparian buffer and floodplain enhancements, and increasing support and education for wetland restoration and protection through existing state and federal restoration programs. So really thinking about the restoration of floodplains, riparian areas, wetlands, and river corridors as a key strategy for increasing flood resilience. Our fifth action group, which is, I think, on the next page, yeah, thank you, is in fact investing in strategic and equitable conservation in order to increase the pace of permanent conservation towards 30 by 30 targets, with Vermont conservation design acting as a guiding plan. And I want to make a note here is that we talked a lot about strategic conservation. We also looked at and reviewed and thought a lot about compact settlements, which was I don't know how many actions there were in our theme related to compact settlement, but we really felt that by doing what's described in Action Group 5, that is the complement to compact settlements, that we are working to restore and conserve and invest in this strategic set of interconnected networks of lands and waters, and complementary to that, directing development to these compact settlement areas where appropriate made sense. And we did not prioritize compact settlement itself, but hoped that somewhere in the climate plan, there is continued attention to compact settlements. And what we identified as a huge issue, that compact settlements tend to occur in places where there was traditionally were placed in the floodplain, and trying to figure out how to deal with that. But we addressed compact settlement by focusing on the complement here, which is strategic and equitable conservation, where it belongs for these interconnected networks of lands and waters. And then the last action group was more targeted to renewable energy generation, and really trying to make sure that we are not citing renewable energy generation in places that are impacting our natural and working lands, and our strategic conservation efforts as described above. So providing incentives to put renewable energy in developed areas, on buildings and rooftops and parking lots, et cetera, and avoiding doing that in natural areas. And I think that was our effort. So I would ask.
What about the new ones?
They aren't listed here, but I can discuss those. Let me see if I can get some real quick. So we identified 4 new pathways or strategies, and they were: stop using biomass for electricity in heating communities, schools, and public buildings because it is not renewable and creates health and ecological problems. Next one, assess status and impacts of outside burning furnaces, monitor and regulate impact on human health and environment. The third one was monitor and regulate the quality of wood pellets from out of state to ensure public health and ensure source is not from logging forests emitting CO2. And the fourth one related to regulating emissions of biochar burning units in the state. So all of these relating somewhat to the use of biomass as part of the climate plan.
Thank you.
Okay.
We also had a lot of conversation about some of the areas said completed or advancing. And so we felt we couldn't comment on that until we knew how it was advancing or how it was completed. So we needed more information. And Marley said she'd help us with that.
Great. Okay. Well, that's a really clear set of ideas that you all just laid out. That's really helpful. And let me just say two things. And Liz Amler's on the phone here too. Andrew, you had mentioned you hope there's some compact settlement conversation happening or land use conversation happening. And indeed, there is a cross-cutting group that Liz has been managing on precisely that issue. And Liz can say whether it's picking up as well issues of siting of renewable energy in that, or it's okay to have it mentioned in multiple places. The council can make sense of that and merge stuff up. But just so you know, that conversation is happening. And Liz, feel free to provide any additional detail on that I'm maybe getting wrong.
Yeah, no, that's right. And the group is really just kind of starting to dig into the action. So it's not like fully formed quite yet, but just knowing that this is on your radar as well is helpful. And I think it's okay right now for there to be both as we kind of are still working through it.
Great. And if folks want to be involved in that, contact Liz in that process.
Yeah, feel free to reach out. You're welcome to join the next meeting.
Yeah. All right. So Earl and Judy, feel free to jump in at any moment. And other subcommittee members, any questions for this task group and the kinds of things that they're really leaning into, the kinds of priorities they're starting to lift up in the work they're doing? Any questions, feedback?
We had a lot of discussion about the words built environments and building in floodplains and floodways and how the words in 30 by 30 didn't really match up with what we were trying to come across with in some of our actions. So a lot of discussion was about looking at 30 by 30 hesitantly because there were so many things that were not supportive of what we were talking about.
And is that affecting how you're writing or rewriting any of those actions?
Yes.
Okay. Right.
Yeah, I would reiterate what Judy said as well. And a lot of our discussion was how do we weave indigenous knowledge into these proposed actions. A lot of them, as you saw in what was popped up on the screen here, referenced conservation plans and things like that. These were done without indigenous input. And so there's still some conversation to be had there. It's not that we're supporting those. That was what the language that we had to work with, and no time to go and read all of these acts and plans ahead of rewriting the language. So we left some of these in, but in my mind, they still need to be open for discussion and not if we just do this exercise and then they go back to the plans they already have, which is helping to create the problem, then our discussions are pointless.
And Earl, I'm hopeful that you as a task group can propose some specific steps around that. If it's too much of an ask
Well,
for
we
task
did,
group.
but it's not reflected in what we just had to present. It was all worded differently from the hours that we spent rewording these things, and that y'all didn't get to see. So I'm explaining it.
That's
Judy and I are
fantastic.
explaining it. This needs to be braided, as Judy likes to say, with indigenous knowledge and Western science. And these plans that are referenced throughout were not done that way. And so that's still an open
discussion is, in doing the braiding and just saying that we revert back to these conservation plans. Well, that's part of the issues that we have. That's part of the problem for us is that becomes then a top-down hierarchy, and why are we going through all of this work if it's just going to end up like that? So somehow it all needs to be open, and there needs to be consultation with Indigenous and BIPOC and environmental justice organizations in order to ensure that everyone is reflected in how the state moves forward.
Thanks, Earl. And great. Ryan, I see your hands up. One quick thing before that. For Earl and Judy and Andrew, it sounds like you've done an amazing amount of work on the language of the task groups document. And I wonder, to your last point, Earl, is there an action, if it's not in there already, about doing what you're saying needs to be done for existing conservation plans, right? If that action isn't in there already, you think it's important, I think like get it in the document to say a step that the state needs to take is to look at these plans with these other lenses on.
Yeah, and I think that we reflected that in the language changes we made to all those categories and then grouping them into priorities. What you saw presented doesn't really reflect all that work that we did, but it's all there. Then following up with the meetings that we'll be having and climate council with Indigenous and BIPOC groups that you all have expressed that you're willing to do. I think once we have these meetings, then it'll be clearer.
That's great. Thanks. Yeah. Ryan?
Thanks. It was asked for general comments and feedback. Is that correct?
Yeah.
I just want to say thank you for synthesizing so much into some very, actionable, easy to digest, and clear recommendations. I think they're great framing, and it leaves a lot of space for the natural and working lands to define for themselves what the best path forwards are to meet our resource concern needs, as well as recognize folks are managing those lands today. Two comments on two of the recommendations. I believe number 4 was focused on like river corridors and floodplains and access, and that is absolutely an important area. And I don't suggest any changes to that, but just within the context of this group, acknowledging that agricultural management in floodplains is a historic pattern of development and something that does alleviate pressure off of uplands that are not as productive, notwithstanding the years when it floods. And so just throwing that caveat about human management in the floodplain from the agricultural perspective is a value that should be considered in where to invest in river access, et cetera. There is cost to farm operations when their fields flood and benefits that are derived to the rest of society. And many of the indemnity programs don't make those farmers whole. And so that's just a more detailed discussion, but that high level point you presented, I think is well framed. I just wanted to put that perspective in there. And then number 5 on Vermont conservation design and 30 by 30, I appreciate you referenced the America the Beautiful, the national kind of not RFP, but genesis of that concept, which was a bit more open in framing what sorts of lands would qualify for protection and are important to be protected. One thing I want to elevate for Vermont conservation design is when you look into the methodology of how they identify habitat blocks, forest connectivity, development in agricultural lands are held as the same level of deleterious impact to those resources. And I don't think that's entirely fair, especially when the law that was just passed for Act 64 that created new criterion in Act 250 for habitat blocks or forest blocks and habitat connectors includes agricultural lands and infrastructure. And so they are part of the review from the legalistic perspective, but from the planning perspective, agriculture, as I've seen in the methodology, is only seen as a deleterious effect. And so that is one of the sources of friction where ag lands aren't seen through that lens as being supportive of a community resilient and biodiverse future, where I think there's really good scientific basis that agricultural open lands do play an important role for a lot of the biodiversity that we see in Vermont. And so I just wanted to say I appreciate the America the Beautiful reference and just flagging one of the challenges with Vermont conservation design from the agricultural perspective. Thanks.
Thanks, Ryan, for those two inputs. Andrew?
Yeah, I'll be real quick. I'm sure we need to keep moving forward, but I appreciate, Ryan, your comments and having been involved in Vermont conservation design, I think it makes sense because it's a natural communities-based design that it doesn't really include agricultural lands. And so that may be in a really important action is really thinking about strategic conservation, including ag lands, and thinking how that affects how we consider ag lands in the face of climate change. So I just want to thank Ryan for bringing that up and that flagging that as something we should work on.
Thanks, Andrew. Judy?
I just wanted to mention the human management comment. That's kind of what has gotten us into some of the problems we're having right now is humans managing the land. We've got to, I've said this forever, we've got to stop putting economy over the health of the land. We will never have a healthy economy if we don't have a healthy land. That's why it's so important to braid the indigenous knowledges into that. Terms like human management are the wrong terms to use.
Thanks, Judy. All right. At the end of these, we wanted to provide some chance for public comment. I will say at the very end, you had mentioned there's some new ideas around biomass, and you just put them out there. And I'm curious, we don't really have time to go into that now, but definitely, I think I'm just thinking, Billy, there needs to be some time on an agenda to spend some time with that, right? As a full subcommittee.
Yeah.
So I wonder how you want to think about that, because we're out of time to do that now, and it seems like an important set of issues.
Yeah, I agree. I think the whole group would benefit from the full materials developed by the task group, where they can kind of read those recommendations for themselves. One option is if we have time at the end of today's meeting, we could kind of loop back to that briefly just to begin the conversation. But if not, we can certainly have that prominently featured at our next meeting.
Let's do that. Yeah. Okay. Great. And so we wanted to pause for public comment at the after each of these. So why don't we do a quick moment here if folks are joining us and have some thoughts. I just saw Annette's comment in the chat as well. That's right. On the agenda, it doesn't say the name of the task group. Andrew, what is your official name? It's Ecosystems Conservation, or you know it better than I. Or
Ironically,
there they are. Evan just throw it in the chat. They're there.
I actually
it's there. You're saved by the bell.
All right, perfect.
There you go, Annette. It's in the chat. Thank you.
Theme 3.
Okay. But yes, public comment. If folks are joining us, aren't a member of the subcommittee, and have some thoughts on what you just heard, now's a great time. Feel free to raise your hand. If you're having a hard time raising your hand, you can just open your mic. We're a small group here. Any folks have a comment on what we just heard? Okay. Great.
Written comment by Jeremy, so let's just all pause quickly to read this.
Oh, yeah. Thanks, Jeremy, in the chat. Great. Thanks, Jeremy. Thanks for the comment.
Yeah. I think that's accurate.
Super.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think the question, as you pose it, is the question. Okay, so let's jump to the next one. And were we going to jump to task group 2? and then circle back at the end with one. Was that the plan?
I'll look to Evan to see what he suggests, given he's got the most sense of what materials are
Yeah.
out there.
Ryan gave a thumbs up, so I guess Ryan, you're
Okay.
okay going last. So
And
Evan,
just before we move on, just want to confirm with the group that after today, we'll share everything that we received so far from group 3 and the other task groups. If we haven't gotten things in yet, we'll share whatever we have. And if we haven't gotten things in, we'll try to track everything down by the end of the week and get that out to everyone. So you can look at the original information in preparation for our next meeting.
right? Yeah, and we'll have the language as Andrew read it, right? And
Right.
all that revised language. Yeah. Super. Okay. All right. So Jake, Steph, and Alyssa, you all are up. I think Evan has a few things to share, but you can give him the heads up when, sorry, when you would want that on the screen. If you could just give us, or here it comes, if you could give us an overview of sort of where you're at in your task group process, and then if you want to lift up some of the key things you want to share with folks today, that would be perfect.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, just again, wanted to say thanks to the previous group. I really like the approach of kind of action grouping and the way that you frame things. So thank you for that. Yeah, I think we're in a place now of we started with a very large list of 70 plus specific actions that cover a pretty diverse range of issue areas. Our group is really oriented around farm and forestry, supporting farm and forestry businesses with adaptation, viability, recovery, economies, and workforce. So a lot, a lot of ground to cover. And so we've gotten our list down. We've consolidated things. I think we have more clarity as to what our subgroup members have some alignment around to raise as priorities. And we still have a little, I think we have a little more work to do in terms of revising language. I think there's still opportunity for some kind of synthesis, similar to what we saw with the previous group. But yeah, I think we're kind of on the right path, and just a little more work to go to get things really tight and refined. And so yeah, what's here on the slides is kind of identifying the higher level themes that we've identified some specific actions or strategies that fall within these areas. And so I think we can start to go through that. So and I think also I do think there's a lot of overlap potentially with our technical assistance recommendations or priorities with both the task group 3 and also with task group 1. So there's a lot of like overlay or similarities I think that we'll see here. So yeah, the first area, just in thinking about support to farm and forestry operations, is climate resilience and adaptation funding and technical assistance. And so this takes a couple of different forms. The first one of supporting the TA kind of provider community, such as conservation districts and others, to enhance adaptation planning and implementation, with I think a focus around fostering greater peer learning amongst farmers and forestry operators. The second one is oriented around thinking about farm viability and integrating more climate risk management components into the work that's done through the Farm Viability Network or Farm and Forest Viability Network, but also not just kind of supporting the technical assistance providers in that integration of risk management, but also helping farmers and forest product businesses think about those concepts and how they're doing their own planning. around their business. I think a big one, and this is where I think there's a lot of overlap with the previous group, is thinking about incentives and implementation support for climate smart practices. There's a lot that's embedded within that, and I think some of the challenge of like synthesizing or combining things is not losing what may be specific programs that we want to call attention to, that we know are effective and just need to increase or enhance the support for those programs, but also acknowledging that there may not be programs or incentives in place that do need to be created and would be new. And then big thing that we've certainly obviously very experienced in the last 2 years with flooding, and heard a lot in some of the stakeholder input that we've done through the Farm to Plate network and other groups have done, is enhancing disaster relief support via emergency relief funding, and that's one component of an action that we kind of teased out and is important to emphasize. So moving from the sort of TA support and incentives for practices, the second area is the infrastructure investment and regional supply chain development. So this is more oriented to thinking about the economics and viability of farm and forestry businesses, and increasing the resilience of our region from supply chain shocks that may come from climate events that happen elsewhere, but also how do we invest in infrastructure that is itself resilient and adaptive to a changing climate. So some of the things that came out through that, some specific things, is increasing base support for grant programs that support the investment of equipment and infrastructure, and also potentially looking at different types of incentives. So the second one, there's a specific action related to local wood supply incentives, which could include looking at making changes to state procurement standards. But I think also some of the things that came up in that discussion too is just having better, more robust life cycle analysis. There can be issues in how embedded carbon is accounted for, and just ensuring that the practices behind those products is aligned with the outcomes and values that we're looking to support. So yeah, you can go to the next slide. I think there's a next slide. Maybe not. Okay, yeah, there we go. So yeah, and then the other two big kind of areas are education equity. So with education, incorporating environmental and climate science into our state educational quality standards at all grade levels, and then the redesign of state education funding model for career tech ed centers. So CTs are really vital in providing students with applied skills that are needed in the farm and forestry industries. But the way that funding is done now puts them in a precarious situation and oftentimes in competition with high schools that are sending students to them. So there's some reports that have come out recently and work to be done there. But also just looking at other ways that we can strengthen the workforce pipeline through apprenticeships, stackable credentials, and other types of programs. And then equity. The first one is really oriented around uplifting and resourcing the groups, that BIPOC-led groups that are doing a lot of great work but may not have the adequate resources to reach the communities that they are working with, and also a lot of programs that may be available have ways in which they could be better with their outreach and creating accessibility to the resources that they're offering. The second one is one I'm actually curious to get some. So that bullet is like how the action is currently written, and I feel like we could maybe improve upon or build out on what's there. But basically, utilizing traditional ecological knowledge to make connections to our tribal and indigenous communities, to support development, utilization of traditional products. And then the last one is a bit of a synthesis of really looking at the ways in which language is used in state materials, and this could include, this is part of the improving outreach and accessibility of grant programs. Is are they using terms and language that is tied to historical injustices and harms? And so, really doing the work to at the state level to review and remove language that is tied to that, and doing it on an ongoing basis, not just a one-time. And then, in addition to that, is anytime I think you're changing language, introducing new terms that might not be familiar for people, is also to support that outreach and education around the introduction and use of decolonized words. So. Yeah, so I think that's everything that we've done to this point.
Thanks, Jake. That's great. Do your colleagues want to provide any more nuance or detail to what Jake just did? Other task group members, Stephen? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, David. Just a couple of quick thoughts. One was I wanted to agree with Judy's description of land management as caretaker. That's a term that I've also become quite comfortable with in my own role as a farm and forest manager. And I think it more adequately describes a path forward in terms of organic, regenerative land management. And to that end, I think that we really need to see that good adaptation is also mitigation, and that mitigation is what we need, and that to Ryan's point of including ag lands that are currently conserved in the 30 by 30 rubric, that really understanding that nature-based solutions, and including a diversified, more human-scaled organic regenerative agriculture, is actually our primary means of finding a path forward out of our current predicament of ecological overshoot. However, currently we can live relatively wealthy in Vermont and pretty much import everything that we need and use from somewhere else. So I think to Judy's point, what we're really talking about as we chart these paths forward is, and through these kind of incentives that Jake just laid out, is a relocalization to the extent possible. And while we have the societal organization and means and wealth and political will to do so, to really be focused on relocalization of our food systems and our energy systems, to the extent that we can, and also keep everybody whole and safe, and not just find ourselves in a situation of adaptation and repair of damage from disaster. So really seeing this as the nature-based solutions as a proactive way forward. I really appreciated Earl's comments on tech being integrated, not just being one action of many, but tech really being integrated into a lens through which we design and implement practices. That wedding of the best of science with traditional environmental knowledge is really critical going forward. And I'll just close by saying that I think it was Judy who mentioned the burning of biomass. I would just keep remitting to, in my opinion, the statement that the most effective thing that Vermont can do to sequester carbon, restore the carbon cycle, and mitigate and adapt to climate change within our region is to protect our mature forests and to manage our forests for old growth characteristics, even as we seek to revive a thriving local woods product economy. So again, that emphasis on protection of old forests is really critical. And we can do that in the 30 by 30 simply by no longer logging public lands in the state of Vermont, which are less than 10% of our total. I also agree very strongly that we really need to get a handle on biomass and biofuel and really question ourselves as to whether the burning of carbon of any sort for large-scale industrial or municipal electricity generation or heating makes sense. And particularly if we're importing, and the same goes with biofuel. If we're importing biofuel that's grown conventionally in monoculture cropping systems from outside of Vermont, that can't possibly be a solution forward for us. Maybe some level of biofuels, along with electrifying our agricultural fleet, could really be part of the piece, but that would have to be homegrown and within an organic regenerative rubric to really be both mitigative and adaptive. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen. And I think clearly there's going to need to be some time in a future agenda around the issues of biofuel, biomass. It seems like an important issue for you all. Okay, on task group 2, and Alyssa, if you have something else you want to say, feel free to jump in. Okay. On task group 2, questions about what Jake and now Stephen have laid out there. Any feedback or thoughts for that group and their focus areas? Earl?
Yeah, I want to thank Stephen for his comments and reiterate again that the Beneke Nation and our coalition are urging the state and the U.S. Forest Service to stop logging on public lands so that we can get to a larger population of old growth. Number one. And number two, to protect our indigenous sacred sites. We have burial and homestead cairns throughout the forest in Vermont. Vermont was largely populated at one point in time before settlement by Beneke peoples. And we have rock cairns representing homesteads and burial sites throughout the forest, all over the state. And many of these are being protected by the settlers who have them on their lands, but in the public lands of state and national forest, they're there, and we're trying to prevent looting of our culture. And we need help in protecting that. We also don't want to see these, conservation lands set aside with no human activity except for extraction of resources. That's how this seems to be going. It's the same with our national forests and parklands. That's what 30 by 30 is creating all over the world, and we don't want to see that here. So we're asking that these lands be left to become old growth, and in addition, protect our sites while still being accessible for folks to enjoy these areas and enjoy the environment. I think we can have all of that. Vermont has the smallest amount of old growth of any of the New England states. 1% is all we have. And the public lands are only about 7% at the most. Surely we can at least protect that and increase the level of old growth that we have, protecting sacred sites and making these areas walkable and accessible for folks to enjoy. Leonie.
Thanks, Earl. And just for my own benefit, before I jump over to Andrew, these issues around any recommendation on the activities on public lands, is it part of task group 2 or is that somewhere else? Or would it show up somewhere else?
Well,
Just
we saw it in our test group 3,
right.
and I see it in this 2 as well. And Stephen also said this very well, and I'm just saying same thing in my own way, except more specific to these state lands.
Yeah.
What I see and too, what I was reading into all of that is management products. Those were the words that I continue to see in that task group 2, and that honestly drives me nuts because it's not well enough thought through, and there needs to be some consultation here, and again, management is a poor word, but we have to stop burning things, pure and simple, and thinking that we're going to protect future generations from true climate disaster. And so
Okay.
we need to be
Yeah.
thinking seriously about where we're going instead of just kowtowing to political influence and doing all of the above, the middle of the road. That's not getting us anywhere. We're blowing past 1.5 C. Now the UN is wondering whether or not we can hold a 3 degree C, which will be an extreme disaster for my grandkids. And so that's where I'm coming from.
Thanks, Earl. I appreciate that. Andrew, let's grab your hand and then let's make sure we've given task group 2 the feedback they need to do their next round. Andrew?
Yeah, I mean, a couple comments and intersections that occur to me. One, just wanted to make sure in my speed reading of our action groups that we did identify the importance of conserving additional older growth or old growth forest and protection of sacred sites. That was, I don't even remember reading that one, but that was one of our actions that we considered to be really important. The other thing relates to what Jake just laid out and also Ryan's comments we get related to agricultural lands and also what Stephen was saying. And that is, really taking a hard look at the agricultural lands, particularly those that are repeatedly flooding under what seems to be our new paradigm of increased and more frequent and severe flooding, as to whether those are actually opportunities for restoring natural communities, but only if that makes sense in terms of them no longer really being viable as agricultural land. So, instead of continually having to restore those ag lands that get flooded. So those were my 2 comments. Thanks.
Thanks, Andrew. Other feedback for task group 2? Yeah, Alyssa, jump in.
I was just going to say in response to that last comment, Andrew, I think there is a action under our section around mapping, and I think maybe resilience zones is the term that was used there, but I think that's part of this, so we won't drop it.
Yeah, got it. Thanks.
Okay. Any other feedback for task group 2 and the work they're doing around ensuring sustainable natural lands and working land? Okay. Great. As is the practice and what the agenda says, we'd be happy to take comment from folks who aren't subcommittee members, public comment on the topics we just talked about. Again, task group 2 is about supporting adaptation, viability, recovery, economics, and workforce in Vermont lands. So if folks have been joining us today, if you had a comment, this is a great time to do it. Okay. Okay, great. And just let me, before we go on, Jake and Alyssa, Stephen, is there anything else you'd want input on before we move on to the next thing? Is there anything else that you'd want the full subcommittee to give you some advice if you're wrestling with some particular problem?
This is just more of maybe a reflection on, I think there is a little tension of, um, like our our set of recommendations is really oriented around, looking at the viability of, farm and forest product businesses, and and I think as we're having these conversations about like terminology and that like I think at some point, as we're looking at this, that our full suite of potential recommendations, that we're prioritizing is then just taking another look at like the consistency of how we're articulating things across these different task areas, and and I do think, in the state of Vermont, like we've created, a language around economic development for these industries, and there may be some tensions and conflict that terminology and language has with some other goals and values that are being expressed, in this committee. So I just want to like identify that, and I think there may be ways that we could approach that as a committee as we get closer to our full set of priorities.
Thanks for saying that, Jake. Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, let's move on to the final task group, which is task group 1. And that's about reducing and sequestering greenhouse gas emissions from ag and forestry practices. Ryan, I think you were going to take the lead in sharing something.
I think that's the plan. But anyone from the task group, please jump in at any time. I'm going to try to share my screen and talk through where we're at on this action. And I will say off the bat, well, first I'll ask, can folks see the
You're good.
PowerPoint? Cool.
Yep.
Thank you. This just includes, so here's the title slide. Here's what our charge was, looking at pathway strategies and actions to reduce and sequester greenhouse gas emissions from agricultural and forestry practices. While there are some agricultural practices that include trees and shrubs, this presentation does not have representation of forestry specific practices. And so that is a gap and something that we need to connect with FPR and others to try to get their input for the forestry side. And so just know that this is only looking at agricultural lands. Okay. As always, we got to set the context. Why are we discussing greenhouse gas emission reductions in agriculture? Global Warming Solutions Act, introduced in 2020, identified, that the promotion of farming practices that sequester carbon are critical to achieve climate mitigation, adaptation, and resilience. And so right from the findings section, we're looking to the statute, reinforcing that these practices that sequester carbon can have multiple co-benefits depending on how you look at what we want to address in a changing climate. The first actionable part of the Global Warming Solutions Act was to change greenhouse gas reduction goals and make them requirements. And then they established the dates by which certain reductions needed to be made. And the first one is coming up in 2025. The Agriculture and Ecosystem Subcommittee was created to basically do what we've been doing, which is look at the natural working lands and recommend pathway strategies and actions that can help support these ag systems and identify their contributions to climate mitigation efforts in the state. Starting with a review of agriculture and the sources of emission and sequestration that are commonly associated with the farms we have in Vermont and the framework for which agriculture is judged for emissions reductions. We have enteric fermentation from ruminant animals. We have the storage of manure, and we have the application of manure and fertilizers to cropland. Also is the opportunity of that same cropland to sequester carbon in soils, and that happens through wonderful carbon cycle and photosynthesis as a driving part of that. So looking at the sources of emissions and sequestration from agriculture, we are presented with the Vermont greenhouse gas emission inventory, and agriculture is tagged with about 16% of the emissions in Vermont. The state of Vermont uses the EPA's state inventory tool, which is prepared by ICF, and through which year on year, Vermont updates the figures in this spreadsheet-based tool to arrive at emissions from agriculture. And that's currently what's reported under the emissions section for agriculture. And so just to remind us, I know I've shared this with the group before, but it doesn't hurt to say it 10 times so we all remember, this 15.8, this 16% contribution is only assessing those emissions. Sequestration is not a part or factored into this figure. Digging a bit deeper into the Global Warming Solutions Act, we find that these reduction percentages, and not necessarily the dates, but how the state of Vermont is going to track these emission reductions is pursuant to Section 582. Section 582 is another section of Title 10, which is A&R section, and under which the Global Warming Solution Act is housed in another chapter. But essentially, it outlines the requirement to look at greenhouse gas emissions as well as sequestration. And one thing that I just want to call out for this group is the strikeout of if practicable using reasonable efforts, which was the pre-existing language for the 2050 goal, increasing the reduction from 75 to 80% and making it mandatory. And so just identifying that, even if it is not practicable or not reasonable, this is still the target. So digging into the state inventory tool, this highlighted on this chapter 7 side is the agricultural emissions. And this currently is what state of Vermont has been using for many years to track and report agricultural greenhouse gas emissions. The state inventory tool has another chapter, which has a terrible acronym that I'm going to use, and I apologize, but it's the land use change and forestry sector. The shorthand for that is LULUCF. But you can look at it more broadly as the flux of carbon in soils based on the type of farm management or the type of crops being grown. Normally, cropland and pasture are considered in this chapter. And so there is an opportunity to look at sequestration. Right now, the inventory only includes chapter 7. We know that the IPCC updated their guidance back in 2006. This is a memo from EPA, which says, hey, we're going to look at this and that we will incorporate these changes likely into the next round of revisions. Well, that hasn't happened since 2006. And there's been some unfortunate overlap with the promulgation of state of Vermont greenhouse gas reduction goals and when the IPCC published this guidance. So really just missed this by a little more than a month. Act 168 of 2006 was published, which gave us the state of Vermont greenhouse gas reduction goals. And then on July 1st, 2006, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change published new guidelines, which gave us the new and other terrible acronym, AFOLU, Ag, Forestry, and Other Land Use, which takes the ag emissions and the land sequestration and puts them together. And so 2008, they updated it to define greenhouse gases, but they didn't incorporate these changes in Act 209 of 2008. And then, of course, the GWSA of 2020 did not have any updates for the greenhouse gas emission inventory for agriculture. And then over here is just the language from IPCC, which says that for the first time, the terrestrial land surface comprising agriculture, forestry, and other land uses, AFOLU, is considered together in a single chapter. You will remember that, as I shared, the EPA SIT tool has these components in two separate chapters for agriculture, the ag emissions and the LULUCF. So that's something, if you were following the Climate Council work for the first initial climate action plan, we're on the Ag and Ecosystem Subcommittee, or listen to me anytime in the past 4 years, this is something that the Ag and Ecosystem Subcommittee identified as a top priority to better understand the state inventory tool itself and how or if to integrate the IPCC guidance into the framework for Vermont's emission inventory. And so with the support of the Climate Council, ANR secured funds, put out a RFP to look at the agricultural emissions. And they selected the ICF to do this review. I think this was a great choice, and it was great to work with these folks, as ICF is the organization that has, since 2006, done the annual updates to the state inventory tool that is shared to all states. So who better to ask about this question to than the person that actually does the inventory? And so we were very lucky to get to work with them on this topic. And this is the result of the research, conversation, dialogue that happened around this topic. And so these are from the final report from ICF. And here are the kind of 4 summary takeaways. ICF recommends that the state inventory tool is the best suited available tool for Vermont to develop a state level inventory. Okay, we looked at many different modeling tools that are out there, their cost, their accuracy, how much data input is needed. And at the end, the state inventory tool does look like it's the easiest and an accurate way to quantify emissions and sequestration. They had a second recommendation in their report, or this is just a second point, I suppose there are multiple recommendations, but the one for this conversation is this section which says to report a complete agricultural greenhouse gas inventory, ICF recommend that ANR report emissions and removals from agricultural lands as estimated by the SIT LULUCF module alongside greenhouse gas estimates from the SIT agricultural module. And so, yes, taking that IPCC guidance from 06, looking at the EPA SIT tool, it does seem that for Vermont, putting these two modules together is a way to accurately get at the AFOLU framework. Third point they had is that this modeling tool that we'll discuss in some detail in a minute, Comet Planner, which is a USDA funded and managed tool that can help, has emission reduction coefficients for many different agronomic practices that farms can implement, which can have a net positive or net negative effect on the flux of carbon into soils. And so they wrote Comet Planner is recommended for use to account for implementation of management practices in combination with the SIT Ag Emissions module and the LULUCF module. Okay, these are, we'll talk about these two in a second. And then just conclusion, they commend Vermont and all the work we've done through the Ag and Ecosystem Subcommittee last time and this time, that we are one of the leading states to be looking at that. So it's good, I think, to be validated in the rather contentious conversations that were had in the first Climate Council process. And so
can I just pause you for a second, Ryan, just for language purposes, if you go back that slide. Point number 2, in somewhat plainer language, is it's recommended that ANR look at the emissions and the sequestration side by side. That's what that says, right? Okay. Just to be clear, so your full little pictogram thing from the beginning to look at the whole picture side by side is part of what it's recommending. Right. Whether the GWSA allows you to do that for your targets is another question, but it's certainly recommending that ANR does it, right?
And under Section 582, there is, language that would mean that it is absolutely appropriate and was thought about when they set this up in 2006. And so these conversations are evolving. And to get to the finer point, which is EPA ag emissions module plus the LULUCF plus climate planner to account for the individual farm management conservation, agronomic conservation practices that farmers are implementing, could be the updated BT ag emissions inventory based on the ICF report. And so this is very heartening and something that this task group is hoping to draft a memo to kind of synthesize all of the disparate points of information that can point to a recommendation to, yes, we have all the pieces in place to update the ag emissions inventory and be congruent with IPCC recommendations. And so this is one of the 6 main recommendations that we'll touch on. And so I just wanted to spend some time reporting out on that final report from ICF and to now hopefully underline why I think this is a good course of action to pursue. And that is looking at the scale of implementation that farmers have undertaken since before the initial climate action plan was published, but has increased in pace of adoption since the initial climate action plan was published in December of 2021. And so looking at agronomic conservation practice implementation, this is just state of Vermont programs through the Agency of Agriculture. This does not include the USDA Natural Resource Conservation Service, who is a larger funder of these practices. This is just a state level investment, which is maybe appropriate for a state level climate action plan, but just wanted to acknowledge that our partners are doing a lot of work on this front as well. But close to 500,000 acres of conservation practices that have been implemented since 2016. And this is the breakdown of the programs that have contributed to the implementation of those practices. You'll see these in the grid of different programs for the ag emission side, like the Farm Agronomic Practices Program and the Conservation Equipment Assistance Program. We know the practices that have been implemented through these state programs: cover cropping, one of the largest ones with a significant climate co-benefit. Similarly, no-till and rotational grazing as well. Looking at the rate and pace of adoption, I want to remind us that this is reported on a fiscal year. And so 2024 looks smaller because the back half of our state fiscal year ends June 30th. And so all of the conservation practice implementation that happens in calendar year 24, but after the end of that fiscal year, won't be counted till fiscal year 25 because cover cropping, which goes on in the fall, which is clearly a very large part of what these programs are funding, isn't reported till the next fiscal year. And so that's why it looks like it's decreased. But if you look at the trend, despite how challenging the weather conditions were last year it just rained all the time, farmers are still implementing an incredible amount of these conservation practices on an annual basis. And we know that it is distributed all throughout Vermont, but with the main agricultural acres being focused in these counties, we see most of the implementation happening there. And so now, thanks to Judson Peck and the accounting work that the Water Quality Division does at the Agency of Agriculture, we have some preliminary report out. You've seen me talk about phosphorus reductions from those practices, right? That is the main purpose and funding source for the funding of these agronomic conservation practices through grant programs for farmers. And the tracking and accounting for phosphorus is the main point of these programs. But as we talked about again and again, there are multiple co-benefits that the state derives from farmers implementing these conservation practices. And so looking at emissions reduction.
Ryan, I just want to also interrupt one more time to say, I want to make sure you get time to get to the actual strategies, pathway strategies, actions too, right? I understand the importance of this lead up. I just want to make sure we don't run out of time to have a conversation about that. Just
yeah, we got a half hour left of this meeting, and this is the last one. So I think it's important to make sure folks are fully aware of the, why these, and then we definitely do have good recommendations that are included at the end of this presentation.
Yeah, Ryan, but just to be clear, the agenda item goes to 11:45. We can probably go a little bit longer than that, but we do need some time to have about a 10-minute wrap-up conversation at a minimum.
Yeah, no, I understand. I think I'm going to use the time and come to close when there's plenty of time for discussion left. And so here we go. We can see the programs that have contributed to these emissions reductions. And we can see the types of practices that have resulted in the sequestration that has been reported through this. And we can now see a report out using Comet Planner, the net sequestration by fiscal year reported in metric tons of CO2 equivalent. And folks are like, what does 22,000 metric tons of CO2 equivalent mean? Well, we put it into car equivalents, the net sequestration equivalent to not driving a number of cars for 1 year. And so here is the report out of the emissions reductions since X64 2015, 92,000 metric tons of net sequestration, in addition to the phosphorus reductions that were made by agriculture. And so I want to just dig into car equivalents that are reported or can be reported using the emissions reduction coefficients of the Comet Planner tool. We can, get to that amount of cars that, we could say are, not being driven because that carbon has been put into the soil, and kind of an average is around 15 to 16,000 cars that are not being driven as a result, is the equivalent effect of these sequestration work that farmers have been doing. And so trying to contextualize this with other efforts that are happening in other sectors. These are the total passenger EVs in Vermont. Under the same reporting hierarchy, about 15,000 EVs have been registered in Vermont, for which about 9,000 of them are that fully battery electric. And so if ag has taken off close to 16,000 ICEs, it's about internal combustion engine equivalent. We're doing agriculture is doing about as much as the EVs are in Vermont. And so this has happened at an incredibly cost-effective rate, $43 per kilogram of phosphorus reduced and $80 per net metric ton of CO2 equivalent reduced. This is below the social cost of carbon. And we also get the phosphorus reductions from these conservation practices. Farmers are doing more than 85% of the work to meet the TMDL for phosphorus for Lake Champlain and Memphremagog Magog basins. And we know from the PES working group that it's not just carbon storage and phosphorus retention, but we're also getting flood runoff mitigation and erosion benefits, which improve water quality outcomes in our surface waters. And so there are lots of benefits that can be quantified from this work. And so here are the 6 recommendations that are broken into 2 different ways to quantify them. You can look at them as 6 pathways, which are represented here, for which there are 12 individual strategies. To recommend, the only reason that agriculture is having this success is because there is a comprehensive program which is funding all the components that are needed to support a sector to make management changes, which includes education outreach, technical and financial assistance, research, and partnerships. And so putting forward these 6 is what we need to keep up this pace of implementation. And when you break out the 12 individual strategies, it gets a bit overbearing. And so trying to fit this into the spreadsheet we were given is something we'll work on for next time. But each one of these prongs needs to be included in a recommendation, or this service delivery model will not function as well as it has been. And so just trying to call out that you have all seen these recommendations. There are some language changes, but they represent that first thing about updating the emissions inventory, then using the existing state of Vermont programs that support ag greenhouse gas emissions reductions, like the Farm Agronomic Practices Program, keep funding a PES program. We have to secure the land base through the protection of our ag farmland, which includes, permanent land conservation. We have to keep funding education, outreach, and research. And it's going to take all the partnerships that we have to support farmers and the farm organizations to make that happen. And so these 6 need to be present for this ag pathway, this ag strategy, this ag, this task that we were given. All these need to be present in a recommendation. And I just want to point out that all of this important work has happened as farmers are facing some incredibly challenging economic headwinds. And we know that farmers have the knowledge and technical skills to enhance soil health on their farms, yet only 58% have the financial capacity to do so. So this is a resource limitation, which is preventing further adoption of these practices, which will have even more co-benefits for phosphorus, for water quality, for carbon, for farmer livelihood, and at the end of the day, we get food. And so here are the 6 pathways that high level want to recommend, making sure that it's inclusive of those 12 strategies. So I appreciate the chance to do 23 minutes of presentation on this, and hopefully we can get down to dialogue. So thank you.
Nice. Very complete, and thanks, Ryan, for that. It's a helpful walkthrough. For folks who've accompanied Ryan in this work, anything else to say, particularly around sort of what's in those pathway strategies and actions, and the work to refine those? Anything else folks want to say who've been participating in that?
I can add. First, just appreciate Ryan being so thorough and sharing all the background there. I think that the things that I want to highlight for folks is that what Ryan shared is just evidence that a lot of the existing programs that have been built up around water quality are really effective, both in getting practices on the ground for farmers, but also in already addressing mitigation of emissions and carbon sequestration. And so I think one of our goals that guided what we would like to suggest for the group is that we build on that success and not build new or other different programs, but really build on the work that's already there. We don't need totally new programs that are parallel and replicating some of what's already been done. Yeah, and I think the other piece is that for those of you that weren't here for this subcommittee's previous iteration, that first part that Ryan was going through around the real importance of updating the way we do the inventory to align with the International Panel on Climate Change standards. I think it's something that's already been acknowledged by the research that was done by an outside body and by ANR. And so it's really our task, our subcommittee's role to continue to ask the Climate Council to make the changes that have been recommended both by the subcommittee and by external scientists and international consensus. And I don't know that anyone else is going to be able to make that case and push that move. So we hope that our subcommittee continues to be a place where we can add that as an important recommendation that we elevate to the Climate Council, so they don't forget to do that.
Thanks, Alyssa. Jake?
Yeah, thanks, Alyssa. That's really helpful. And so two things on what you said. One is, and also what Ryan you presented is one, the existing programs. Can we be really clear in identifying those and understanding too the potential sort of funding constraints or desired amounts? I think that would be really powerful to be as clear and precise as possible about what those programs are, what their current funding levels are, and what would facilitate, what kind of amount of money, resources would facilitate additional kind of adoption and impacts. And then the second comment is a question around does the GW SA need, is there an amendment that needs to be made in order to actually incorporate this kind of change or inclusion of methodology that's different accounting than for other sectors. Kind of this net gross accounting question. So yeah, I'm just curious, like if the legislation if the legislation itself as written is obstructing adoption, or if there are means to work around that don't require an actual change to the legislation itself.
Thanks, Jake, for those two comments. And just on the last question, Ryan, do you have a quick answer to that or somebody else?
Yeah, I have a quick answer to both. I cut 50 slides, but we have the funding, the amount of applications that we've gotten but haven't been able to fund. There's a lot of unmet need out there. There's a lot of capacity for farmers to do more and willingness on their part to do more. We're out of money. As far I did in 582, if you read that language, there's very clear allowances for both emissions and sequestration to be counted, and so there's very good argument that nothing needs to be changed in the GWSA to allow this amendment to happen to the inventory. It's just going to take all the partners working together to make sure we put this in place in the right way.
Thanks, Ryan. That's awesome. Jael?
Yeah, so I have a couple comments, but definitely about the funding and in terms of, I mean, a lot of these programs, it can come through NRCS funding, but in a lot of cases, the farmers need to come up with the money first to implement some of these practices, and they don't have that funding. So, one idea is that the farmers are actually paid to go through the process of having a conservation plan written for their farm, and that they're paid for that time and that process, and to have that plan. So then they can actually have the funds to buy the cover crop seed or whatever it is they need until they're reimbursed through NRCS programs. So I think we really need to look at how we're going to get money to farmers to implement these practices. And then my other concern is just in terms of the accounting for carbon sequestration and, no-till is huge. A lot of farmers are implementing that, but that means that they're spraying more glyphosate. And there has been some research out of the Organic Farming Research Foundation that's showing that the use of herbicides actually kills mycorrhizal fungi that kind of prevents the soil sequestration from happening, because the mycorrhizal fungi is really important in that process. So, I would like to see us really support more organic practices rather than just implementing more the use of more chemicals.
Thanks, Jael. Yeah. Earl?
Yeah, thank you, Jael. I couldn't agree more. I really appreciate what you just said. I want to focus to payment for ecological services, which seems to be promoted. There is no data, no research out there that demonstrates that carbon trading, payments for ecological services, however you want to state it, actually reduces greenhouse gas emissions. You have to look at who's buying the credits. The corporations that are buying the credits are buying them. Why? Why are they spending all that money? It's to mask or hide on paper their greenhouse gas emissions and to stay in compliance with those in some cases. But it's not lowering the greenhouse gas emissions. The projects on the ground that they're paying for are also, they're not accurately able to assess the project sequestration on these projects and for how long. And so this is the problem with the carbon market. It's a Wall Street alternative, which isn't getting us out of our problem. Traditional leaders around the country, including our BIPOC supporters, are all against this. And it's just an extreme commodification of nature that began with land ownership in the first place, which we disagree with. And now everything is commodified this way, and forestry, ag, all the lands, the trees, the rocks, I mean, come on. Why farm? Just sell what you got and sit on the porch. But you're not reducing greenhouse gases. And that's the point. If we don't do that, it doesn't matter what we do. And so I would ask, and you're going to be hearing it from me, from the indigenous and the BIPOC folks that you'll be hearing from, to stop. I agree with Jael. Farmers need to get paid to help make this transition in their sector, but it shouldn't come from Wall Street hiding greenhouse gas emissions. It should come a different way. Thank you.
Thanks, Earl. And I just want to pause on that topic for 1 second.
Can I
because
respond real quick?
Yeah, I wanted to pause on that comment. Ryan, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, Earl, if you can look into what is meant by PES in Vermont and the programs that are being run, it is not carbon trading. It is farmers that are exceeding environmental stewardship thresholds are paid additional monies for their efforts to reach those levels of environmental stewardship. That is what is meant by PES here in Vermont. And so using critique of a system that isn't even being used in Vermont and is not being promoted in Vermont is distracting from the value that the CSP Assist Vermont Farmer Environmental Stewardship Program is contributing to farmers and sequestration goals. So I'd be happy to meet with you to walk you through the 3-year Payment for Ecosystem Services Working Group, all that was discussed, but if you read the final report, there was clear indication that what you describe of trading to obfuscate corporate emissions is not what is intended by a PES scheme in Vermont and is not the goal, and it's certainly not what is being implemented. So it is distracting to the good work the farmers are doing in the CSP Assist program right now, in my opinion. Thanks.
I read the report. I also am friends with a lot of people that were in that group who were frustrated because of the way it was written and turned out. That's where I'm coming from. If you can give me a clear definition of PES that takes away my concerns, I'm happy to see it. I'm just going by the term and what I read in the report, and then what I'm seeing on the ground. And so these are all contradictory things. So I'm just telling you my position.
It sounds like there may be some value, and maybe in the two of you or some others, having a deeper dive on that so that as much clarity as possible can be achieved. So I'd recommend
so
that.
many reports and laws and things are woven all throughout all of this that it would take forever to research everything and see what is being meant by these little micro sentences that reference all of these things, and then we're to try to figure it out. But the PES, it remains to be seen just exactly what actually came out of that. But I do know the frustration of the folks that were participating in that.
Okay. All right. Thanks. Billy?
I just wanted to kind of highlight or ask those who know better. I think Ryan's right that this applicable statute related to the greenhouse gas inventory does allow for changes in methodology over time. I think the challenge is that the Global Warming Solution Act ties the sectoral emissions reductions to a inventory methodology that, if it changes, would throw off all those targets. So I think it's not that we can't change the inventory. It's more like what the implications are on the GWSA and whether that has to be changed in statute as well to accommodate a different accounting for ag emissions.
Thanks, Billy, for clearing that up. Yeah. Ryan?
Yeah, Billy, and just to make sure that's absolutely part of the process that we're looking at. And just while the reduction numbers may change, they are going to be relatively back to 1990, right? So this is going to be accounted for the entire ways. And anyways, yeah, so that's I'm just agreeing with you that it is very complicated to implement, and that's why it's taking some time. Hopefully we can get there.
Okay, great. Other thoughts, reactions, questions for what this task group's working on? Andrew?
I mean, I appreciate this discussion. This is, I knew some of this, but it was really great to get a lot of detail and try to dig in on it, and appreciate Earl's concerns and the response to that. So I think I've learned a lot, and I guess there's this larger thing that I'm trying to keep an eye on, which is the whole co-benefits of our work, and that, we're really thinking in our ag and eco subcommittee about the co-benefits to water quality and mitigation, and vice versa. It's happening from those groups as they think about what they're doing. So I just, I mean, there's such a powerful and well-funded group of people and partners working on water quality in Lake Champlain, and how can they, be effectively engaged in practices that are also mitigating climate change and increasing resilience. So I just, just really thinking about how to engage a broad set of partners that way.
Thanks, Andrew. Yeah. So one of the next steps for task group 1 may be how to provide some additional guidance around priority within the structure of something that does need to hold together. Because I heard loud and clear, Ryan, from you, it's like those 6 pathways are complementary and hold together to do what you're trying to do there. And within that, trying to say, okay, legislature, or okay, fellow folks in the administration, don't, like, this is something you really need to be paying attention to as you hold those 6 things together. Like, this is something that really needs to be addressed in the legislature or something. So I think that kind of signaling priority will be a next step for you all as you finalize the language on the big spreadsheet of stuff. So I'd encourage that task group to think about how to do that.
Thanks, David. Can we just honor our opportunity for public comment for all task groups, break for a quick second? Then we'd love for you to help us kind of think about what concrete next steps we need to take between now and our
That's
next
great.
meeting.
Yeah. Thanks, Billy. Yeah. So if you've been joining our meeting today and aren't a member of the subcommittee and you'd like to express something, I saw some stuff go on in the chat earlier. There was a suggestion around universal base income. But that's from Steph. Okay, sorry. I thought that was from someone who wasn't part of the subcommittee. But if you aren't part of the subcommittee, final comments?
Thanks,
Great.
Earl.
Thanks, Earl. Okay. All right, so I'm not seeing that right now. And thanks, folks who have been joining and listening in today. Billy, do you want to say a few words about next steps, and I can complement that, or how would you like to do that?
Sure. So we have a meeting scheduled in 2 weeks, which is the 21st of November, and we've got one meeting 2 weeks after that on December 5th. I think the December 5th meeting is when we're going to effectively need to wrap up our work and have it ready to go over to the council. So we've got a lot of work to do in the next month. I would welcome your and others' guidance, David, on how we prepare for the next meeting. But I think at the next meeting, we're going to need, as individual subcommittee members, to look at the materials we get from the task groups to kind of prepare our own kind of top line questions for that group, probably in advance of the meeting. And then have everybody kind of prepared to dig into questions and then begin to try to reach consensus around any changes and priorities at that time. And I don't know the best way to manage that and would welcome your suggestions there, David. But
Yep.
I think starting with kind of making sure everyone has the information from the task groups, or if the task groups want a little bit of time to kind of update their materials based on the conversation today, that might be appropriate too.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me grab Andrew's hand and then I'll say a few words about how I think this could be done well. Andrew?
Yeah, it's a separate thing. I'll just mention it really quickly. I just want to make sure I have an understanding of what's the expectation of subcommittee members for the input sessions that are coming up, since some of those are going to happen before our next meeting, and it's not clear to me what our expectations are. Thanks.
I'm glad you said that. Let's hold for 1 second and come back to that. In terms of your process to finish the work of pathway strategies and actions, sort of Billy's vision makes a ton of sense, where there's going to need to be some reading by all of you in between now and your next meeting, where you dive in to the sort of full spreadsheet of pathway strategies and actions per task group, and whatever sort of prioritized actions, or in some cases, groups of actions folks have made. And so you need to do that reading. And then ahead of the next meeting, instead of going line by line for every single action for every single task group, you're going to need to make an agenda of, these are the key things we need to talk about because I'm not comfortable with this, or I have a different suggestion about how this should happen. And you're going to focus on those kinds of issues for each of the three, right? And you're going to try to get through as much as you can. There does need to be a carve out on that for the biomass questions, because it seems like that's coming up now, and that's a tricky one. And so let's make a little carve out in your next meeting, and certainly at the last meeting too, to finish that up. I think what I would suggest, and with Evan's help and others, is that task groups, you take any of the feedback you got today, and I'm happy to share the notes I've been taking and others. You take a few days, think about anything else you'd like to do to your documents, and then on Monday, or we can make a final of sometime Tuesday perhaps, you send in whatever you've got to Evan and Billy and Jael, and they can send it out to the full subcommittee, and then everybody has a solid week to look through those materials and really think about where you'd want to place the emphasis of your conversation on the 21st. So and you'll do that all over again after the 21st to your next meeting on the 5th of December, right? Spend some time looking at the revisions, figuring out the issues that really require your group time, and find ways where you're able to articulate areas of agreement. I'll say one more thing, and that is, the council would be thrilled if subcommittees say, yeah, everybody can live with this output. There's sort of a consensus agreement on it. We recognize there may be issues that's tough, and it's okay if your subcommittee says, for many folks, this is their view on this. For other folks, they have this other view. So know that you have that possibility if you're really reaching an impasse on a particular issue, that you can send up to the council sort of different views. I would use that very sparingly because it's challenging to do that on everything. Okay, so that's my suggestion on how to do it. Task group leads, take a few days, make some changes. By Tuesday next week, you're sending it out. Everybody's reading, going through. Your next meeting, you're really prioritizing the things that require discussion. And then you do it all over again on December 5th to wrap it up. Any questions or concerns or friendly amendments to that way of working? Okay, great. So thank you, task groups leads. I will send around my notes. They're sort of my raw notes, and feel free to ignore the things that don't make sense or ask me for clarity. Andrew's question: what's the role of subcommittee members in the input session? I have some thoughts on that. Jael, Billy, you happy with me just saying a few things, or would you like to chime in there?
I would just preface by saying that the two next week will have coverage at a minimum by either Jael or I. We're both committed to attend at least one or both of those. So we'll have representation there. But beyond that, hand it over to you, David.
Great. I think as many subcommittee members as possible who can come, particularly if, on these ones, they don't fit nice. They don't fit in the 3 task groups, right? There's one on agriculture, and then there's the next one that's on natural lands and forestry. And so those are going to cut across your 3 task groups. So I would recommend as many people who can come to that one on Tuesday at noon and then the one on Wednesday at 6 p.m. Come, listen, and it's also okay to engage in some dialogue with people who are attending, right? There's going to be a short presentation at the front, and then it's just an open space for people who are attending to provide some input, make some comments, ask some questions. And if you're there, you may be able to answer some questions. And if I'll even call on some of you, if there's an opportunity to sort of generate a little bit more dialogue. So it's not really like a hearing or something like everyone gets their 3 minutes at the mic. It's more of a conversation that we're going to do in those. So I don't know, Andrew, if that answers your question, but that's the way it's going to be held and encourage participation.
Great. Thank you.
And I think Billy and Jael have figured out who's going to do the presenting in those 2, right?
I thought you were doing the presenting.
Definitely.
I thought I was doing the closing.
Yes, you are helping the close, and definitely need subcommittee members, tasks, co-chairs or whoever to help present the content. I can be of assistance, but it's better if one of you all does
I'm
that.
planning to go on ag. I just got to make a much shorter presentation for the ag emission side, probably like 2-3 slides. But I'm happy to present that on Monday or Tuesday, I suppose.
Tuesday, yeah. And so, Ryan, why don't we work on that presentation this Friday, like tomorrow, and just do a quick check-in on that presentation, since Monday's a holiday. And it'd be great to sort of lock that in and make sure everyone's comfortable where that is.
Yeah, I honestly don't know where we stand with preparing those presentations and what the plan is. So, maybe finding some time for us to talk tomorrow.
Yeah, my understanding was that we were supposed to give recommendations after this meeting to put into the slides, but since we don't really have a clear path, I don't know what to present.
Well, there was great stuff presented today, and that's the essence of what gets presented at these public information. So the sort of what you did today, you can tidy that up, trim it, figure it out. Honestly, that content is the right kind of content. So I wouldn't feel that you don't have it. I think you have it. Now you just need to package, and I can help you do that. Let's find a time tomorrow. I know we're at the end of the meeting right now. Let's find some time. We'll pull it together, and Evan's got his hand up because I bet, Evan, you're offering to be helpful.
Yep. Yeah. No, thanks, David. I was going to say a lot of the same things. My hope was that, we have these specific priorities that would have been shared today, and they were. So kind of bucketing those into 2 separate parts, and I can help facilitate that and create these 2 separate, PowerPoints, if you will, for those input sessions.
Nice. Okay. Let's maybe, for those of you who can stay online right now and want to be part of that scheduling, and Ryan, if you want to stay on that, and Billy and Jael, Evan, if you can stay for just a second, let's do a little calendar check for tomorrow and see if we can all get on the same page to do that.
So let's adjourn our subcommittee meeting. Thanks everyone for all your work and continued engagement. It's been great. And we can stop the recording, and then we can